Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our just general joy of being alive. And of course, we talk about sustainable design as well. And today I want to welcome Ryan Mikita to the show. Ryan's with Ricca Design Studios in Pittsburgh, and we're going to talk about restaurant design today. Ryan, hello, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is about our 130th, 140th episode, and I've never talked about food service, so I'm really excited about that. Let's talk about you first, Ryan. I always start by letting our listeners get to know the guests a little bit better. You know, I look at your background and it's almost like the universe just guided you towards your career in food service design. Tell us about that path that led you to the creation of Ricca Design Studios.
Yeah, I like to say that I fell backwards into the industry. I started working out in restaurants and operations as a server, a bartender in New York City in 2009, whenever I'd moved there actually as an aspiring actor, and found myself working in restaurants and got really interested in the operations themselves, really interested in the hospitality world, and then pivoted my career. And I took some turns through the real estate industry, through project management effectively to build my skill set. I started working in the design and construction department for a Patina restaurant group, and that was sort of my first introduction to the design side of things, working for a restaurant design group. And then in 2018, I joined Ricca Design Studios, and I've been with them now for 8 years, and I'm a principal and partner with the firm.
Oh, right on. Okay, so you've seen almost every aspect of this world. I'm going to start with a really ignorant question because I haven't. You know, is there a difference between food service design and restaurant design?
I like to say that food service design is restaurant design because, by proxy of designing a kitchen, you are facilitating food service to the public. So I like to say they're sort of one and the same, but there are different scopes to the world of restaurant design. So we as a firm, food service, specifically focus on the design of the back of the house and the functional components of the operation. So in most cases, a developer or an architect will bring us on board and they'll say, this is our vision for what this restaurant concept or what this food service concept is going to be. And we help them with the planning aspects of it to verify the amount of seats that they might need, verify the service stations, the front of house functions, and then we tell them how big the kitchen needs to be. We advocate for the back of house, and then we do the entire design for the functional side of the operation and all of those things that actually lead to the impetus of the restaurant in the first place. So food service, I think, is an integral part of restaurant design, but within that, there's many different smaller trades that are involved.
That's really cool. I love the process stuff. So we're definitely going to dive into this. Let's start with sort of a generic question. What are the features of food service design and restaurant design too that set those things apart from other types of buildings and spaces?
Well, the kitchen is the number one utility drawing aspect of any building there is. If a building has a kitchen in it, that is by far the most utility drawing or the most infrastructure requiring component of a building. The different trades and things that are involved in making a kitchen work, it's pretty overwhelming. So, we find ourselves at the center of the trades. I mentioned architecture, but also it's really important for us to partner with the engineering. So the mechanical departments, electrical, plumbing, all of those things. As a part of our set, we're in the equipment world. So while maybe the architect is designing the front of house, they're putting together interior schedule and they're fitting it out with furniture, we're actually specifying the production equipment that is going into the back of the house. So specifying the walk-in refrigerators and freezers, specifying all the cooking equipment, designing each of the different stations, the chef's counters, laying out all of the individual stainless tables and all of the kitchen areas. And then one of the most important things is ventilation. So, we specify and design the actual hoods that capture all of the exhaust, the grease laden, coming from all of the cooking equipment in the hoods. So we're within the box itself. That's the way we like to say it is, the architect gives us, the general contractor gives us the finished box, the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and we fit out the kitchen space with everything in between.
Okay, so this is interesting. So there's some math going to happen there that you must have some rules of thumb that say if it's a 50-seat restaurant, then you need this big a grill space and you need this big an oven and you need, is it that work? Like,
For sure.
do you
Yeah.
have
It's
those
I
rules
mean
of thumb?
it's multifactorial, Joe, for sure.
Yeah.
It is very mathematic and very analytical to start a lot of back of the napkin math to get to, those allocations that I was talking about before. So I mean, we can look at the amount of meals that demand the request for how many meals they're intending to serve, let's say during a peak period, and reverse engineer and size a walk-in refrigerator and a freezer based on that. So there's a lot of calculations that go into the program, and it's really important for us in our world to truly justify our program with the numbers, back those sort of up from that sort of mathematical sort of standpoint. But we like to say that in our industry, there's a certain point where the numbers, the math become more of an art than a science, because we are talking about people working in the built world. And a lot of what we do is efficiency and design around the ergonomics of the operational staff that's working in the kitchen. So, the numbers can only get us so far. It's really important for us to back things up to, as I said, to be able to justify what we're doing in designing. But at a certain point, when we get past the stage of the numbers, we start into block planning or adjacency diagrams. That's where things become more fluid, and we have to start to really think about what's happening within each individual station of the kitchen.
I worked in manufacturing for many years and I've been involved with layout and design, and it sounds remarkably similar. And that's logical, of course. Essentially, it's a manufacturing process making food, only with some love and some magic.
Solar heat gain doesn't have to be a design challenge. Solera translucent glazing units help architects create buildings that not only work better, but feel better, balancing light, comfort, and energy efficiency. Discover how to design higher value spaces without compromise at advancedglazings.com.
So let's talk about staffing. Like you must get involved with that as well. Like determining, if the throughput is X, then you need this many staff involved and you need this kind of staff. Do you get that deep? Do your hands get that dirty?
Yes, it's not a correlation between X amount of meals equals X amount of people. It's more a really granular conversation with the operators themselves, the operators being the people that are going to be running the hotel or the server. If it's a school, if it's a server, it's a corporate client, we would refer to them as whoever their operator is, the people that are actually running the kitchen. It's more about identifying the processes that are happening within the kitchen itself. So there are levels to the amount of production and prep that can happen in any given kitchen, and that's a major driving factor. So, if we're working with a school and a big part of their brand philosophy is that they are working with local farms and that they are sourcing everything from local, and let's say they have some sort of butcher program where their proteins are being sourced from local and they're processing those in the kitchen itself, that's a component of the operation that would need to be staffed in an area that would need to be designed, compared to,
Right.
let's say, a restaurant where they have a relationship with a butchery right down the street, and all of the meats are already being processed and are being brought to the facility already sort of pre-prepped. That would alleviate some of the pressure that we would need to have in the kitchen, and you maybe wouldn't need a butchery if that was sort of the outline of the operational program. So it's not so much a one-to-one X amount of meals equals X amount of people. We
Right.
really try to look at, okay, what functions are happening in this kitchen? And of course, the bigger, the more robust the operation it gets, the more people that are required. A good example of that would be, one component I haven't mentioned so far is we do the warewash design. So, I mean, if you're working in the higher education sector and you've got a dining hall that's serving 1,000 students, and those 1,000 students are eating over an hour, let's say, you have to figure out a way to efficiently process all of the soiled plates, glasses that are everything that are coming through that servery into the warewash room. And depending on the size and the amount of students, that would then drive how big let's say, the dish machine needs to be and how many people are staffed to actually operate that. So certain parts of the kitchen, we can sort of look at, this may need X amount of operators. Others, it's based on, are they actually going to be completing this type of operation here, or do they have some sort of relationship with a third party location where some of their prep or their functions are happening offsite?
Right on. Okay, I've got a number of questions, Ryan. You've seen them. I sort of aim them at, decorations and branding and that sort of thing. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I think if I ask the same questions from the perspective of operations and operational design, they might be equally interesting. So let's give it a try if that's okay. Does that work for
Sure.
you? Let's
Yep.
do it. All right. So I'm going to give you a list of like just sort of attributes or defining factors about a restaurant. And you tell me how it affects the way you're designing the kitchen and the operational flow in general. So let's take, say, an intimate sort of restaurant, a quiet place where people go with a close friend to have a talk and play catch up. How does that impact that sort of objective of making that vibe in the restaurant? How does that impact your ops design?
So when I think about, let's say, the vibe of a restaurant or a requirement to have an intimate setting versus a dynamic setting, I think about the engagement of the back of house in relation to the front of house. So, for example, the less activity and the less food service function that is happening in the space, the quieter and the more intimate it's going to be just by not having activity sort of happening in the dining room. So, for an intimate setting, that wouldn't be a setting where we would see an open kitchen per se. It would likely be a situation where it's a traditional back of house where the kitchen is separated beyond a partition wall, and the dining room is entirely separate from the front of house. In a setting where, let's say, there was an open kitchen but they wanted to maintain some sort of intimate environment, we would have conversations with the architect around the finishes that they would be selecting in the space, maybe more subdued. Maybe there are options for using, like, let's say on the backsplashes in an open kitchen, maybe using tiling instead of stainless steel or something warmer that maybe has more of like a sound deadening quality to it. A lot of the specifications for things like the ceiling panels, the floors, the walls, we don't really get into the details of those. However, we help the architects in planning. But, from our end, we can actually design tables and kitchens and things like that to have more of a substrate in them so they can actually subdue the sound. But I think, to your point, to the word intimate, I would think that would signify a traditional back of house and front of house separation, and there wouldn't be sort of any kitchen activities visible or happening in the dining
Right on. Okay. Now let's go on the opposite end. You mentioned dynamic environment, like a high energy, loud, fun sort of place. What's the difference there?
room. Yeah, the first thing I think about is the lobby, whatever that is, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel, a dynamic experience from the time that the guest enters into the space. Usually that would be some sort of anchor function, like a bar. So if you want to draw people in off the street, if you want people to be engaged in an exciting experience from the time that they come into it, then you would put some sort of programming component, which is what we would call that, up maybe a bar, next to the entry to create sort of a separate experience, separate from where the dining would be happening in the space. And then you could do something like have an open kitchen, like we've talked about, bring those sort of back of house functions into the front of house to create dynamic activity in the different locations of it. And so that's sort of where I see that balance happening is if you bring those components, give opportunities for the kitchen, the food service operation, the beverage operation to engage with the dining room. That's a great way to make things more dynamic.
Interesting. All right. I want to talk about like a kid-friendly restaurant. Is there anything unique when, it's a family-style restaurant?
That's a good question. I don't know if there would be anything too different in terms of how we would design a kitchen if it were a family oriented restaurant versus just traditional. I mean, obviously, maybe something like a bar program is not going to be as public, right, or as celebrated as an experience of that. I think in terms of planning, just putting my architect and interior designer hat on, just remembering myself whenever I used to go to restaurants with my kids, I used to love big banquette booth seating in the corner, lower tables, that type of thing, larger dining rooms. I don't know, however, there's not much of a difference, I think, in the way that we would approach a kitchen operation from a standpoint oriented from kids versus towards adults. At the end of the day, honestly, it would probably be simpler. I mean, we do, this is a little bit of a different case study, but we do design for K through 12 schools, for elementary schools, and those programs are typically a little bit simpler than they would be, like, for instance, a restaurant, right? Because you're not talking about as much specialty equipment. The menus are typically simpler for children, the offerings, chicken nuggets, French fries, things like that you would see in restaurants on a kid's menu. The same thing sort of applies to elementary school. So if anything, I would think from our standpoint, it would simplify the kitchen equipment package or the type of equipment or program that we were specifying.
Right on. That makes a lot of sense. Looking at the kid thing, I'm going to go way off script here for a minute, Ryan, but this might be fun. My son has celiac disease, right? So he's got to be gluten free. I've got 2 butter dishes. I'll have 2 different butter knives. There's 2 different toasters in my house. And it's not like incredibly complex, but there's steps that I take to make sure that I minimize the chances of an exposure. And there's multiple other allergens. Is there unique things that you have to do in these modern times with so many allergens or allergies issues?
Absolutely. I think this is a great segue. And, to your original question about designing a restaurant, maybe for kids versus adults, this is a better way to frame it. Allergen and sort of dietary restrictions is a critical component of what we do. And we especially see this in higher education settings in particular, to the point where we're seeing entire food platform stations, serving stations, and serving areas and cafeterias for students that are designed with their own equipment and their own serving equipment separate from the rest of the serving area. And the reason that we do this is to eliminate cross-contamination and to signify to students that all of the allergen and dietary requirements that they have are met. The same can be applied to any type of kitchen, and this is why it's critical to have adequate support and prep space in the back of house. Any type of requirement for a dietary restriction or something, an allergy, needs to be prepared in a station of the kitchen that would be separate from wherever the rest of it is. And that can come down to fried products. Fried chicken has to be batched and breaded separate from where any type of, let's say, calamari is, if you have a shellfish issue, and the same thing goes for fries. So it becomes a strategy. And Joe, that can be as simple as a table in the back of house is a dedicated allergen station. If, let's say, it's a really small restaurant, it could be as big as we talked about with a servery in a university, where they literally design an entire station for food service that is specific to allergen and dietary requirements. They would have their own fryers, they would have their own cooking equipment, so that anything that they're preparing is kept completely separate from the rest of the serving areas. And you need to do something like that based on the demand. So in a university setting, if you've got hundreds of students that have the same sort of allergy restrictions, that would justify creating a platform to do something like that. Versus a restaurant where maybe a couple people every single day are coming off the street and have allergy restrictions, it doesn't sort of justify the capital investment to go to those sort of measures in the back of house. And the others, and I think this is relevant as well, the other side to this consider is there are also cultural restrictions and cultural things that can guide the design of the kitchen in certain situations. Specifically, if you've ever seen a kosher operation or around halal, there are specific requirements for the prep and the way that product is even stored or prepared. And so we've gone to the measures. For instance, at Cornell University, we actually designed a kosher and halal kitchen, which was completely separate than the kitchen that was designed to support the rest of the servery. And that's because, in particular with kosher, that product can't commingle or cross paths with any of the proteins or anything that's coming into the kitchen. It can't be prepped in any way, even on counters where other product has been. It can't be cooked in anything where other product has been. It has to be served in something sanitized and separate from the rest. So there are levels to the degree to which we can sort of separate these things out. I'd say it'd be like kids being one specific. It's cultural is maybe the bigger box, right? Like maybe the bigger question that would move the needle.
Okay, and well, let's talk food style itself. Like, how much difference is there between, well, we talked about cafeteria a little bit, but say comfort food, back of house compared to, say, a modern fusion cuisine that's targeting 25 to 35-year-olds that are just out to have a spectacular culinary experience?
Yeah, I mean, there are many different levels to the types of operations that there are. There's quick service restaurants, which, and again, there's levels of quality. There are millions of different equipment types that we have at our disposal to design to these different types of operations. But this would be part of our process that we would discuss with the operator as we're going through it. There are fryers that are designed to do sort of one-off batches, like a single portion of fries at a time. There are pressure fryers where you can do pounds of fries at the same exact time, depending on the amount and the volume of the product that you need to put out. For something like comfort food versus fusion, there's likely to be more specialty equipment for fusion. And a lot of that has to do with sort of separate prep areas. When I think of fusion, I think of Asian fusion in particular, which is something that we see in a lot. And so something like a sushi station or preparation for a sushi operation would be very different than what you would see for comfort food, right? Comfort food, just off the back of the hand, would require fryers. It would likely require a griddle to cook a lot of proteins, those types of items versus sushi, which is mostly cold items. So a lot less of a requirement for cooking. There are specialty things like hibachi, you can grill meats and types like that. That's where we're sort of getting into that specialty equipment. The stations then need to be designed around the processes and the operations that are actually happening. So that's sort of one of the ways that we would kind of look at the differences between those. Frankly, there's a lot of nuance, Joe, to the type of refrigeration. I think that applies here as well. If you're doing a comfort food operation, you have a lot of frozen products like chicken and fries and things like that. So you might need a larger walk-in freezer in the back of the house. You might need more upright equipment. For something like sushi, you likely need more refrigeration, more drawer products here. So when we start to get into this type of conversation, we really get into the weeds of how we would design each of these stations. And the word refrigeration is wide. It could be under counter, door, drawer. It could be upright. It could be a walk-in refrigeration. Within these types of equipment, there's a ton of versatility.
What about a steakhouse? I mean, I think of, flame shooting out of a grill and all those sorts of things. Is there anything particularly unique about a steakhouse?
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely. That's actually where my roots were. I got started working in steakhouses. So I very fondly love steakhouses and to this day enjoy the experience of going to one. I mean, that's where you see charbroilers, large cooking apparatuses, broilers, pieces of equipment which, are considered heavy duty in many ways. That's one of the distinctions that we use amongst equipment types is light, medium, or heavy duty. And something like a steakhouse would fall under the category of heavy duty because it's high heat, high protein, you're yielding a ton of grease, right? And likely that equipment you need to make sure that it holds up longer over time. And whenever you're talking about a steakhouse, the requirement for proper ventilation is going to be much higher than, for instance, let's say you're going to a sushi outlet where maybe you only have one piece of cooking equipment just used to lightly cook off a couple of meats that you're using for rolls or something like that versus a steakhouse where maybe you've got 10 pieces of equipment and you've got two hoods that are each 10 or 15 feet wide.
Imagine a building where natural light flows freely, solar heat gain is under control, and comfort is unmatched. With Solera translucent glazings, you can create spaces that work better, feel better, and deliver lasting value. Learn how at advancedglazings.com.
Okay. Yeah. You just mentioned ventilation. Let's talk about health outcomes a little bit. I've seen kitchens that are completely isolated from the outside world, and they're almost like little, sweat house dungeon kind of places. Modern kitchens, modern design. Do you bring in the health outcomes of the kitchen staff into the thought process at all? And if so, how do you do it?
Yeah, to your example of a kitchen being designed like a sweat house, like that is not the world that we're living in. I would say that beyond even designing to the efficiency requirements and the operational requirements of the kitchen itself, our priority is the comfort and the safety of the staff members that are working in the kitchens themselves. And I think that even trickles down to what I said about efficiency because, if a person working in a kitchen in a prep station has to take 5 steps instead of 3 to complete their task, let's say they're just working on produce and their job is for 6 hours in the morning, they're just chopping fruits and vegetables. And that's literally what their job is. They're just a sous chef that's doing that for half the day. And every time they turn around to move product from one station to the other, they have to take an additional 2 steps. Over the course of a day or 6 hours, you can see how much that would not just add to the inefficiency of the operation, it's additional steps though that the staff member has to take as well. So it's a negative draw on their comfort and their well-being. That's sort of the low end tier of the consideration. The highest being it definitely would be the ventilation for sure. Any type of kitchen where you've been into where it is overheated or warm in that kitchen is likely due to inefficient exhausting of the ventilation or a lack of air being returned into the space. So one part of it is critically getting all of the exhausted grease out of the space by way of proper ventilation and an exhaust hood, whether that's grease laden type 1 or in a dish room, which is another situation as well. I mean, I've been in situations where literally the dish room starts raining because there is not enough ventilation to pull all the condensate air out of the kitchen. But that's only one aspect. The other side of it is you have to resupply fresh air into the space as well. And that sort of balance right there, drawing out all of the heated, extracted grease from the space and then replenishing fresh air into the space is a major draw on the comfort of the staff members working in the stations. There's sort of ergonomics that are built into the work that we do. The counter heights, standard would be a work counter in a back of house in a kitchen is 36. It's a little bit higher than the ADA accessible height because it's considered a working space, but that is an industry standard. Most of our consultant friends in the industry all designed to that sort of height of a standard of counter. And you arrive at that by looking at the ergonomics about a person standing up against a bench, how much they have to bend their elbows and how intensive it's going to be for them to do their work. Do they have to lean over the counter? We design things like this into the reach of a shelf being over top of the counter. So is the shelf 14 inches deep instead of 12 so that the person can reach that without having to lean forward over the counter? Finishes are a big part of this conversation as well, especially the floors. The Department of Health has a healthy say in the work that we do. All kitchen finishes have to be smooth, non-porous, and cleanable. And flooring should be, it's really important that there's a treading, whether it's a quarry tile or whether it's an epoxy, but you can't have slippery floors in a kitchen. And something that we've seen that sometimes gets missed is area floor drains in kitchens. Kitchen floors should be sloped so that they stay dry. The reason that floors in kitchens get slippery is because there's a lack of plumbing, perhaps, so that whenever the water, kitchens are wet spaces, there's waste, all of those things collect on the floor. And so there's a lot of planning that goes around to making these kitchen spaces very cleanable and very safe for staff because it is a very active space and you have people walking around kitchens. So keeping the floors dry is a critical one. Keeping the space properly vented so that the person is comfortable and they're not sweating while they're working, especially when you're talking about, to the point of the fryers we were discussing before, these are sometimes in the range of over 400 degrees and you have a person standing in front of them full time. So those types of considerations are a huge part of what we do. And this goes into the serving as well and the front of house. And I think another big part of this is lighting as well. There are foot candle requirements so that if a person is working in a prep station and they've got a Japanese fillet knife in their hands, there's not to be any shadows cast on any of their workstations while they're doing so that they could injure themselves, right? If they're working with a knife and there's a shadow that casts on their hand or something like that. So, and again, a lot of this is sort of built into the codes that we're required to work within. And these are just kind of considerations that are in the back of our head as we're sort of going through our process.
Do you ever see windows in a kitchen to let in some natural light? You mentioned the shadowing thing. Is that of value or is that to be avoided?
Oh, if you can do it. The challenge is it's just really hard to put windows into kitchens because vertical real estate is just as important as any type of area that we have in this space. However, we've seen clear story windows. So if we have a counter and we have a shelf above it, we could put a window, a very narrow rectangular window along the top of the kitchen. In any environment where I can make the recommendation, where we have the opportunity to put a window into the kitchen, I absolutely recommend it for staff. And we see this in a lot of ways, maybe not necessarily in the spirit of doing that to start, but if you've ever seen bakeries, we will design entire kitchens or prep spaces that just have windows wrapping around the entire thing.
Right.
And that's not just a way to make the life of the people working in the kitchen a little better. If you do it in the right way, it can also be a really interesting way to grab the attention of people walking down the streets or students in a servery or in a corporate center and grab their attention and create and make a more dynamic space as well.
Love it. Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about sustainability. Does sustainability come into the world of back of the house design at all?
Absolutely. And a lot of these things we've already sort of touched on with ventilation as well. I'd say Most projects that we're working on these days have some sort of, well building or lead requirement that we are required to oblige to those requirements. And a major movement we've seen recently is the shift towards an all-electric kitchen. So I've been doing this for a number of years now, since 2018. And I would say in 2019 or pre-pandemic 2020, maybe 3 out of 10 projects that I was working on were all electric at the time. And now post-pandemic, 6 or 7 years later, we're closer to, I'd say, 5 or 6 projects out of 10 being designed to an all-electric standard. It really varies from sector. We do some hotel projects where it's a European flagship brand and their standard, things like induction and sort of electric kitchens have been around for some time in other countries, in Europe in particular, and they're sort of novel to America, but not novel to food service as a global practice. So a lot of the stuff we're just starting to see in America, but it's really driven by sector. That would be one factor. Is this a Euro style kitchen versus an American style cook line? There's a lot of perception that not all kitchen equipment is made equal, and that you can't really accomplish the same things on all electric as you can versus gas, and that's widely being disproven as we start to see more equipment types and more advanced electric equipment coming to the market. But a great example of this is in higher education. We're actually seeing a lot of the schools we work with being driven towards all electric initiatives because it's tied to enrollment and it's tied to the students that are coming to the university. So we're finding that as tuition rises and the cost of education becomes more expensive, that students and their families are becoming more discerning and are wanting to go to universities that better mimic their personal values. So to bring this full circle back to what we talked about before with allergen and dietary restrictions, a student who has celiacs at a university, one of the things that they're going to be looking for is a robust dietary program. A school where they go into the servery every single day is going to be able to provide them with the dietary restrictions, the things that they need, in a way that doesn't feel like less than, in a way that preserves quality, and it feels like it's on par with the experience that the rest of the students are sort of getting. To that point, sustainability is a major concern for students. The younger generation, there's much more of a concern over the state of the environment. And so that's another thing that is driving enrollment, or sort of the universities. They're being pushed or asking the question, do we need to move this program in an all electric direction to satisfy satisfy student requirements? And we recently had a project where this school wants to design this servery set to open in the next 2 to 3 years. They're not quite ready yet to make the switch from all gas or to electric. And so we designed a hybrid model. But what we did is we partnered with the engineering team, and we actually created a utility model, sort of a high level utility load that would assume in, let's say, 10 years time, they wanted to switch out all of the gas equipment and flip over to all electric. We gave them alternate equipment cut sheets. We gave them a utility load so that in 10 years time, if they wanted to, day one, they're sizing their electrical generators to be able to accommodate a fully electric operation. I would say that's probably the biggest contribution that we give in the process when it comes to sustainability. As a firm, we also are highly involved in the waste management processes, and that can be something that we get really in the weeds in. If there are initiatives for composting or a specific way that waste is handled coming in and out of a hotel or a corporate center, even the waste stream systems itself, what are they doing with all of the waste that's coming through? Are they just putting it into a 50-gallon bin into a dish room, or is it going into the sewage system? Or is it being toted out, composted, taken to a party operator? So I think if I could summarize, I would say that ventilation, the question of utilities, all electric or fossil fuels, and waste management are 3 critical pieces of the process that we're involved in that really tie back to the question of sustainability.
Right on. Wow, that was a very thorough response, Ryan. I hugely appreciate that. There was a lot to be learned there. We're coming near the end, and so we've come to the $1 million question that I ask every episode. Ryan, I ask this to every single guest, and I ask them to answer from whatever perspective they'd like. Okay? What makes a great building?
All right. Well, I am really passionate beyond food service. I'm really passionate about architecture as well. So my opinion comes here, I think, from like the holistic, the overall picture. So I think before we can talk about the building itself, I think we have to look at wherever this building is, right? And so I most appreciate a building that is, whether it's new construction, whether it's adaptive reuse, I most appreciate a building that is thoughtful to some degree to the local culture or the history or the building types that have come before it. As a practice, I would say I'm pretty anti-neo, futurism. And so I really sort of appreciate pulling from the past as a way to come into the present. So I think if I'm coming off the street and I see a hotel, I'm looking for some sort of traits that pull the building into the local culture, and it's not intended to just stick out like a sore thumb that is in a novel, futurist, or sort of modernist sort of way. From the operation itself, let's say like we go into the doors of the hotel, I think wayfinding is absolutely critical. I spend so much of my time on the road traveling, and I have such bad experiences with wayfinding through so many places. It just blows my mind that I think that wayfinding is one of the most critical things to create a positive building experience for people that are in the public. It is a great way to reduce traffic. It's a great way to showcase things. And I think that great design of restaurants and the locations of things like bars and the back of house and all of those different things in the front of house, they're critical to creating an experience. And I think about like myself when I go into a building, I don't want to have to put on my, okay, where to go to find this. I want to have a seamless, frictionless experience. And so I think that's sort of a through line here is, what can you do to create a frictionless experience for the guest coming in, whether it's a student, whether it's an employee, whether it's a person coming in off the street to a restaurant and a hotel. And then I think we get into, quality and experience are very important as well, given what we do in particular. So my own initiatives, being a food service consultant, my objective at the end of the day is to give the operators a kitchen operation that can accomplish their goals in a way that is efficient and lean and provides quality and can help them to generate revenue. So I'm looking for a building that sort of ties into the local, creates excitement and is respectful to where it came from or the local city or the culture, wherever it happens to be. And I think the interior experience should be something that is enjoyable and comfortable, allows people to kind of let go and relax. And they don't even have to think about the operation. Let us think about all those sort of planning things. There's this great podcast I've listened to called The 99% Invisible. And I think that applies a lot to what we do in the field of architecture and in food service design. It's our job to be thinking about the idea that 99% of the things that happen around building design or that go into something, the average person isn't even thinking about whenever they go into a space. And I feel like I really take that to heart, that it's our job to be the ones about worrying about creating a guest experience. But whenever someone comes into a space, they shouldn't be concerning themselves with any of those different things. It should be a seamless, frictionless, focused on the experience for the person.
That was fantastic. Ryan, before we go, one last thing. Do you have any exciting announcements or any upcoming events or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I can think of a couple things as a company, Ricca Design Studios. We're an international consultancy. We have been for many years, but we're anchoring and growing our presence. We just opened an office in London as well in Mexico City. And so we're starting to expand internationally and get more support and work on projects. We also have an office in Saudi Arabia, which is really exciting. And then, for myself, we've been involved in a couple really exciting projects in Washington, D.C. We've been working on the Capital One Arena transformation project, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
It's ongoing right now, but it's actually 3 years worth of construction that's happening phased over the courses of the summers whenever the arena is not in operation. So they're doing it in the summers after the NBA finals happen and before the hockey season kicks off in the fall. But that's been a really exciting one that you'll continue to see that transformation that's been happening over the next couple of years. I would say those are the two biggest things. Yeah, we're really excited for the direction of the company. We're getting bigger, opening more offices, and really increasing our bandwidth. And for myself, it's been really great to get into the public assembly, the sports space, working on the East Coast here, just down the street from me in Pittsburgh.
Right on. Ryan, this has been amazing. I learned so much today. I can say that I was extremely ignorant as to the depth of knowledge and skill and art and creativity that goes into creating a great kitchen and an overall operation. Thank you so much for all that information you shared today.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about what we do and always happy to, food service was the kind of thing where before I got into it, I didn't know it was a career. It turns out someone needs to know how to work in a kitchen to design one. They don't just design themselves. So I'm really excited and passionate about what we do. And thank you, Joe, for the opportunity to chat about it.
It was a pleasure. Thanks again, and take care, Ryan.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.